the twin suns of Borealis burned high in the orange sky, casting long shadows over the massive arena that stood at the heart of the city. The arena was a place of legend and fear, its stone walls decorated with banners of past champions and fallen warriors. Today, the stands were filled with thousands of alien spectators, each eager to witness the trial known as the Blades of Honor. In the center of the arena floor stood Nira, a young warrior with dark markings across her skin and sharp, determined eyes. Her armor was light and worn from many battles, and she gripped two curved blades, one in each hand. The crowd roared her name, but their voices carried anger rather than respect. To them, she was no longer a hero. She was a traitor accused of betraying her people. Nira's heart pounded as she looked around at the circle of gates surrounding the arena floor. Behind each gate waited a challenger, skilled fighters chosen to face her one by one. She knew the truth of this trial. It was not about honor or justice. It was about silencing her forever. Her tribe had been wiped out during a rebellion, and the ruling council needed someone to blame. She had been framed, and now she stood alone with no allies. High above the arena, in a private viewing platform, the masters of the trial sat in tall chairs. Their faces were hidden behind golden masks. They watched with cold, calculating eyes. If Nira survived the trial, their lies might be exposed. If she died here, the truth would die with her. Among the crowd sat a lone human named Lucas. He had arrived on Borealis only a few days earlier, a traveler passing through the sector of space. Humans were uncommon on this planet, and most people treated him with curiosity or suspicion. Lucas had never seen an event like this before. The sheer size of the arena and the intensity of the crowd were overwhelming. When he first heard about the Blades of Honor, he thought it was just a ceremonial match, a contest of skill. But as he watched Nira step forward, he felt uneasy. There was something wrong in the way the crowd shouted for her defeat and the way the masked masters stared down from above. The sound of a deep drum filled the air. The first gate opened with a loud crash, and a towering warrior stepped out. His armor gleamed silver, and he carried a long spear tipped with energy. The crowd erupted in excitement as the warrior circled Nira, ready to strike. Nira breathed deeply, her body tense but steady. She had trained her whole life for combat. Even though she was weary and alone, she would not show fear. The warrior lunged, his spear thrusting toward her chest. Nira twisted aside with incredible speed, her blade slicing across his side. The warrior roared in pain but did not fall. The fight continued with a flurry of strikes and parries. Nira moved like water, her twin blades flashing under the suns. Finally, with a decisive spin, she disarmed her opponent and delivered a final blow to his chest. The warrior dropped to the ground, motionless. The crowd cheered wildly, but their voices were filled with hunger for more blood. Lucas watched with growing concern. This was no honorable duel. This was a spectacle designed to entertain and condemn. As the first body was dragged away, another gate opened. A second challenger emerged, smaller but faster, armed with twin whips that crackled with energy. Nira gritted her teeth and prepared for the next round. Her muscles ached, but she forced herself to focus. The second fight was brutal. The whips lashed at her, cutting through the air with deadly precision. One strike caught her arm, leaving a searing burn. Nira hissed in pain but refused to back down. She charged forward, closing the distance before the whip wielder could strike again. With a swift motion, she knocked one whip away and drove her blade into the opponent's chest. Lucas clenched his fists as he watched. He could not understand the language of the crowd, but their excitement was clear. They were not cheering for justice. They were cheering for death. The fights continued. Each gate brought a new challenger, each more dangerous than the last. Nira's body was covered in cuts and bruises. Sweat dripped down her face, mixing with the dust of the arena floor. Her breath came in ragged gasps, but her spirit remained unbroken. By the time the final gate opened, she could barely stand. Out stepped the last challenger, a massive warrior covered in heavy armor, wielding two broadswords. The crowd went silent in anticipation. This was the final test, and everyone expected Nira to fall. Lucas felt a surge of anger. He did not know Nira, but he could see the truth in her eyes. She was not a traitor. She was a victim of a corrupt system. Something deep inside him refused to let this injustice continue. The final battle began with a clash of steel. The armored warrior swung his swords with devastating force. Nira dodged and parried, but each movement cost her more strength. Her legs trembled as she struggled to keep up. At last, the warrior struck her across the side, sending her crashing to the ground. The crowd erupted in cheers, shouting for the final blow. Lucas could not sit still any longer. Without thinking, he leapt over the barrier and sprinted onto the arena floor. The crowd gasped in shock. No outsider had ever interfered with the Blades of Honor. Nero looked up in confusion as Lucas reached her side. She had never seen a human before. His face was determined, his eyes full of defiance. "Stay down," he said firmly, though he knew she might not understand his words. The armored warrior turned toward Lucas, enraged by the intrusion. Lucas raised his hands, showing he carried only a small energy weapon. It was nothing compared to the massive swords, but it was all he had. The warrior charged. Lucas dove to the side, narrowly avoiding a strike. He fired his weapon, hitting the warrior in the leg. It was not enough to bring him down, but it slowed him for a moment. Using that moment, Nira pushed herself to her feet. With a fierce cry, she lunged at her opponent, striking with every ounce of strength she had left. Her blade pierced the weak point in his armor. The warrior staggered, then fell to the ground. The arena fell silent. Everyone stared at the human who had broken the sacred trial and the warrior who had defied death. From above, the masked masters shouted commands, ordering guards to capture both of them. Lucas quickly helped Nira to her feet. "Come with me," he urged, pulling her toward a small service gate he had noticed earlier. Though she did not understand his language, Nira recognized his intent. With no other choice, she followed him. Together, they sprinted into the dark tunnels beneath the arena as the furious crowd roared behind them. The tunnels beneath the arena were dark and narrow, carved long ago from the stone beneath the city of Voralis. The air was damp and smelled of rust and old blood. Faint echoes of the roaring crowd above filtered through cracks in the ceiling, mixing with the heavy sound of Nira and Lucas's breathing as they ran. Lucas gripped Nira's arm tightly, guiding her through the winding passages. She stumbled several times, her body battered and weak from the trial, but she refused to fall. Her warrior pride would not allow her to be carried like a helpless child. Lucas could feel her trembling, yet her steps remained determined. Behind them, the sharp clanging of metal boots grew louder. Guards were pursuing them, and Lucas knew they did not have much time. These were not simple guards with basic weapons. The arena masters would have sent their best hunters to capture them. "Faster," Lucas urged, glancing over his shoulder. He could see the glow of torches bouncing in the distance. Though he spoke in his own language, the tone of his voice was clear enough for Nira to understand. Nira gritted her teeth and pushed herself forward. Her side burned from the deep slash she had received in the final battle, and blood soaked her torn armor. Every breath was painful, but she would not stop. If they caught her, they would not simply kill her. They would drag her back to the arena and make her an example for all to see. As they turned a corner, Lucas spotted a heavy iron door with strange markings etched into its surface. He yanked it open, revealing a storage room filled with old weapons and dusty banners. He pulled Nira inside and shut the door quietly. For a moment, they stood in silence, listening to the distant sounds of the hunters. Lucas crouched near the door and took a deep breath. His heart pounded, but his mind stayed sharp. He had been in dangerous situations before while traveling through hostile worlds, but this was different. Now he was responsible for someone else's life. Nira sank to her knees, clutching her side. Lucas knelt beside her and examined the wound. He had seen battle injuries before, but this was severe. She needed proper medical care, yet there was no time to search for a healer. He pulled a small emergency kit from his belt and began cleaning the wound with steady hands. Nira flinched at first, glaring at him with suspicion. She did not understand his strange tools or his gentle approach. Among her people, wounds were treated with fire and herbs, not strange glowing gel. But as the stinging faded and the bleeding slowed, she realized he was helping her. Lucas spoke softly while he worked, even though he knew she could not understand his words. "You're going to be all right. Just stay with me." Nira watched his face closely. His expression was focused, his brow furrowed with determination. There was no trace of cruelty or deceit in his eyes. She had seen many warriors fight bravely, but none had risked themselves for a stranger. This human was different. When he finished, Lucas wrapped her side with a strip of cloth and helped her sit upright. Nira gave him a small nod, a silent sign of thanks. Though their languages were different, they were beginning to find ways to communicate through actions and expressions. Before they could rest for long, the sound of footsteps drew closer. Lucas tensed and looked around the room for another way out. At the far end, he saw a narrow ventilation shaft partially hidden behind a pile of broken shields. He pointed toward it and then to himself and Nira. Nira understood his plan immediately. Together, they pushed the debris aside, revealing a tunnel just wide enough for one person to crawl through at a time. Lucas went first, his small frame making it easier to maneuver. Nira followed, though the cramped space made her movements slow and painful. As they crawled, Lucas kept glancing back to make sure she was still behind him. Each time their eyes met, he gave her a reassuring look. Even in the darkness, he wanted her to know they would survive. The shaft eventually opened into a vast underground cavern. It was dimly lit by glowing blue crystals embedded in the rock walls, casting eerie shadows across the uneven ground. A shallow river ran through the center, its water clear but cold. Lucas helped Nira down from the tunnel and scanned the area. The cavern was quiet, but he knew their pursuers would not give up so easily. They needed to keep moving. Nira touched his shoulder and pointed to a series of carved symbols on the cavern wall. She spoke a few words in her language, her voice urgent. Lucas shook his head, not understanding. Frustrated, Nira picked up a stick and began drawing in the dirt. She sketched the arena, the city above, and a series of tunnels beneath. Then she marked a location far beyond the city and tapped it firmly. Lucas studied her drawing and realized she was showing him a safe place, perhaps a hidden village or sanctuary. He nodded and smiled slightly to show he understood. Relief flickered in Nira's eyes. For the first time since the trial began, she felt a spark of hope. They followed the river deeper into the cavern, moving quickly but carefully. Nira's steps were slow, her body weakened, but Lucas stayed close, supporting her when needed. Along the way, they passed ancient carvings on the walls depicting battles and rituals. Nira glanced at them with sadness. These were stories of her people, now almost erased by the lies of the ruling council. Lucas noticed her expression and paused. He reached out, gently touching one of the carvings. Then he placed his hand over his heart and gave her a firm nod. It was his way of saying he respected her past and her pain. Nira's throat tightened. She had never met someone from another world who showed such understanding. Among her own kind, strength was valued above compassion. But this human, though physically weaker, carried a strength of spirit that humbled her. Their moment of connection was cut short by a sharp noise behind them. Torches flickered in the distance, and the sound of hunters echoed through the cavern. Lucas cursed under his breath and motioned for Nira to run. They sprinted along the riverbank, splashing through the shallow water. Nira stumbled several times, but Lucas kept pulling her forward. Suddenly, a net shot out from the shadows, wrapping tightly around Lucas's legs. He crashed to the ground with a grunt. Nira spun around, her blades flashing as three hunters emerged from the darkness. These hunters were heavily armed, their armor marked with the crest of the arena masters. One raised a spear toward Nira, while another dragged Lucas to his feet. Nira's body ached, but she refused to let them take Lucas. With a fierce battle cry, she lunged at the nearest hunter. Her movements were fueled by desperation rather than strength. She slashed across his chest, forcing him back, then spun to strike another. Lucas struggled against the net, kicking wildly. He managed to grab a sharp rock and cut himself free. As one of the hunters turned toward him, Lucas dove for his small energy weapon and fired. The shot hit the hunter's shoulder, knocking him off balance. Together, Lucas and Nira fought side by side. Though their styles were different, they moved with surprising harmony. Nira's swift, precise strikes complemented Lucas's quick shots and agile dodges. At last, the final hunter fell to the ground, defeated. Lucas stood panting, his hands trembling. He had never been in a fight this intense. Nira reached out and touched his arm, giving him a steady look. It was a silent reminder that they were still alive and still had a mission. They moved quickly after that, leaving the bodies behind. Nira knew more hunters would come, and they could not afford to linger. As they climbed a steep incline leading out of the cavern, Lucas glanced back at her. "Why are they doing this to you?" he asked softly, even though he knew she could not understand. Nira tilted her head, catching the question in his tone if not the words. After a pause, she placed her hand on her chest and spoke her name. "Nira." Then she gestured toward the city above and mimed chains around her wrists. Lucas understood enough. She was a prisoner, a scapegoat for something larger. He nodded firmly. "I'll help you, Nira. We'll get you out of this." Though she could not understand his language, Nira saw the determination in his eyes. For the first time since her capture, she felt truly seen. They reached the surface as the first light of dawn touched the horizon. The city of Voralis loomed behind them, its towers glowing in the early sun. Ahead stretched a wild, untamed forest. Nira paused to catch her breath and gazed at the trees. This forest was dangerous, filled with predators and hidden traps, but it was also their best chance to disappear. Lucas looked at her and gave a small, encouraging smile. Together, they stepped into the shadows of the forest, leaving the arena and its lies behind. The hunt was far from over, but they were no longer just fugitives. They were allies bound by survival and the first threads of trust. And as they vanished into the wilderness, both began to wonder if this fragile alliance might one day grow into something far greater. The forest of Voralis stretched endlessly before them, a vast sea of towering blackwood trees whose branches twisted like ancient claws. The air was thick with mist, and the cries of unseen creatures echoed from the shadows. The deeper Lucas and Nero went, the less they could hear the sounds of the city behind them. It felt like stepping into another world, wild and unforgiving. Lucas paused beneath a massive tree, his chest heaving. His clothes were damp with sweat, and dirt clung to his hands and face. Traveling through the forest was far more difficult than he had expected. The roots were thick and tangled, the ground uneven and slippery. More than once, he had stumbled and nearly fallen into hidden pits covered with vines. Nira, despite her injuries, moved with greater skill. She knew the land better than Lucas, even though she had never been this deep into the wilderness. Her steps were light, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Though she was weak, she pushed forward with the strength of her warrior spirit. She could not afford to rest, not while hunters were on their trail. Lucas glanced back at her, worry tightening his chest. The bandage he had wrapped around her side was already soaked with blood. She needed proper care, but they could not stop. Every hour they delayed gave their enemies more time to track them. When they reached a small clearing beside a shallow stream, Lucas motioned for them to rest. Nira shook her head at first, unwilling to slow down, but Lucas placed his hand gently on her shoulder and gave her a firm look. His meaning was clear. She would collapse if she did not take a moment to recover. Reluctantly, Nira sank to the ground near the stream. Lucas knelt beside her, refilling his water pouch and offering it to her. She took it silently, her fingers brushing against his as she drank. For a brief moment, their eyes met. There were no words between them, only an unspoken understanding. They were two beings from different worlds, bound together by a shared fight for survival. Lucas washed his face in the cool water and then checked the small energy weapon he carried. Its charge was low. He had fired it several times during their escape, and now he had only a handful of shots left. Against the hunters sent by the arena masters, it would not be enough. As he examined the weapon, Nero began speaking softly in her language. Lucas did not understand her words, but he listened carefully, watching her gestures. She pointed toward the forest ahead, then to herself, then to the wound on her side. He understood that she was explaining something about their path and the danger she was in. Lucas nodded slowly. "We'll keep going," he said, though he knew she could not understand. "We just need to stay ahead of them." Nira studied his face and seemed to grasp the essence of his promise. She gave a small nod in return, then closed her eyes for a brief moment, allowing herself to breathe deeply. It was the closest she had come to rest since the trial began. While they rested, far behind them in the forest, a group of hunters moved silently through the shadows. At their head was Krail, a towering alien warrior with dark green armor etched with jagged scars. His face was fierce and cruel, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Krail was known across Voralis for his skill in tracking and killing. Where others relied on machines, he relied on instinct. Krail crouched low and touched the ground. The earth was disturbed. A small print here, another there. Two sets of tracks. He smiled coldly. "They are close," he growled to his hunters. "The human and the traitor will not escape." The hunters behind him moved with precision, their weapons ready. They were eager to please Krail, for serving him meant gaining favor with the arena masters. Back in the clearing, Lucas was unaware of just how close danger had come. He helped Nira to her feet, and they resumed their journey deeper into the forest. The mist grew thicker, clinging to their skin and making it difficult to see more than a few steps ahead. Hours passed as they pressed on. The forest was filled with strange sounds. The rustling of unseen animals, the distant howl of predators, and the occasional splash of water from hidden streams. At one point, they came across a massive fallen tree covered in glowing blue fungi. Lucas stared at it in awe, momentarily forgetting their peril. Nira, however, motioned for him to keep moving. Beautiful or not, this was a place of danger. As they walked, Lucas tried to piece together what he knew about Nira. He remembered how fiercely she had fought in the arena, how she had stood alone against impossible odds. She was clearly a skilled warrior, but there was something more to her story. She was not fighting just to survive. She was fighting for something greater, though he did not yet know what. Nira, meanwhile, was watching Lucas just as closely. Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy, and she had never met one before. At first, she had assumed he was weak, a fragile being who would slow her down. But Lucas had proven her wrong. He had risked his life to save her, fought beside her against the hunters, and continued to support her even now. She was beginning to see him as more than just an ally. Their silent connection grew stronger with every step, though neither fully understood it yet. As night began to fall, the forest changed. The mist turned to a thin fog, and glowing insects floated through the air like tiny lanterns. Lucas marveled at the sight, but his awe quickly faded when he heard the unmistakable snap of a branch behind them. He froze, holding up a hand to stop Nira. She immediately crouched low, her blades ready. The forest fell silent, too silent. Even the insects seemed to pause their flight. Lucas scanned the darkness, his heart pounding. Then he saw a faint glimmer of metal in the distance, moving between the trees. "They've found us," he whispered, even though Nira could not understand. Before they could move, a net shot through the air, narrowly missing Lucas's head. Nira shoved him aside and slashed the net with her blade before it could strike. From the shadows, Krail emerged, his massive form towering over them. His hunters spread out, surrounding Lucas and Nira. Krail's voice was like gravel as he spoke in the Voralis tongue. Though Lucas could not understand the words, the meaning was clear. Krail wanted Nira alive and Lucas dead. Without warning, the hunters attacked. Lucas fired his energy weapon, striking one in the chest. The creature fell with a guttural cry. Nira moved like lightning, her blade slicing through the air as she engaged two attackers at once. Krail himself advanced toward Lucas, swinging a massive axe with terrifying strength. Lucas barely dodged, rolling across the ground and scrambling to his feet. He fired again, but the shot glanced harmlessly off Krail's armor. The battle raged in the darkness. Nira fought fiercely, but her weakened body began to falter. Lucas saw her stumble and raced to her side, firing at a hunter who was about to strike her from behind. They fought back to back, their movements unspoken but perfectly synchronized. Lucas's quick reflexes and Nira's deadly skill created a rhythm that kept them alive. But Krail was relentless. With a roar, he charged at Lucas and slammed him to the ground. The human's weapon skittered across the dirt, out of reach. Nira screamed in defiance and launched herself at Krail, but he caught her mid-strike and hurled her against a tree. She crumpled to the ground, dazed. Lucas saw her fall and felt a surge of anger. He grabbed a sharp branch from the ground and thrust it into a weak point in Krail's armor. The warrior roared in pain, staggering backward. Seizing the moment, Nira rose to her feet and drove both her blades into Krail's chest. The massive warrior let out a final, guttural cry before collapsing. The remaining hunters hesitated, then fled into the darkness, unwilling to face the same fate as their leader. Breathing heavily, Lucas stumbled to Nira's side. She was bleeding badly, her body trembling from exhaustion. "You're safe," he said, though he knew she could not understand. His voice was calm, steady, and filled with concern. Nero looked at him through half-closed eyes. She reached out and touched his hand lightly. For a warrior like her, it was a rare and powerful gesture of trust. Lucas helped her to a nearby hollow beneath a tree, where they could hide for the night. He gathered leaves to make a bed for her and used the last of his supplies to tend to her wounds. As she drifted into sleep, Lucas sat beside her, keeping watch. He knew the hunters would return, and their journey was far from over. Far away, in the city of Voralis, the arena masters received news of Krail's defeat. Their anger was fierce, and their plans grew darker. They would not allow a human and a disgraced warrior to expose their corruption. The hunt was no longer about capturing a fugitive. It was about crushing a threat to their power. As the first light of dawn crept into the forest, Lucas tightened his grip on his weapon and looked down at Nira. He did not know what awaited them, but he silently vowed to protect her, no matter the cost. For the first time since he had left his home world, Lucas felt a sense of purpose. He was no longer just a traveler passing through strange lands. He was part of a fight that would decide the fate of two lives and perhaps even the fate of a world. The sun rose slowly over the vast forest of Voralis, its pale light filtering through the thick canopy of blackwood trees. The morning mist curled around the roots like ghostly fingers, and the forest awoke with the calls of unseen creatures. Lucas sat with his back against a tree, his small energy weapon resting on his lap, his eyes scanning the shadows for movement. He had not slept all night. Beside him, Nira stirred, wincing as she shifted her weight. The wounds on her side and arms were healing, but slowly. The bandages Lucas had wrapped around her were nearly soaked through again. She opened her eyes and looked at him, her expression calm but tired. Lucas offered her a drink of water from his pouch. She accepted it with a faint nod, her fingers brushing his hand for a brief moment. Even in her weakened state, she still carried herself with the dignity of a warrior. Lucas admired her strength. He could see that her spirit had not been broken, even after everything she had endured. The forest was quiet that morning, almost unnaturally so. There were no sounds of distant animals or rustling leaves. Lucas's instincts told him something was wrong. He scanned the trees, his muscles tense. Suddenly, Nira's sharp ears caught the faint crunch of footsteps approaching. She froze, her hand instinctively moving toward her blades. Lucas followed her gaze and saw the shimmer of movement between the trees. His heart sank. The hunters had returned. Nira rose slowly to her feet, her face a mask of determination. Lucas stood beside her, his weapon ready. They had fought hard to survive this far, but he knew that the enemy would not stop chasing them until one side was completely defeated. Out of the mist, a massive figure emerged. It was Krail, the fearsome hunter they had thought dead after their last battle. His armor was scarred and cracked from their previous fight, but he was very much alive. His cold, glowing eyes locked on Nira, and his lips curled into a cruel smile. Behind Krail came a smaller group of hunters, fewer in number than before but more heavily armed. They fanned out in a semicircle, cutting off any escape routes. Lucas felt a surge of anger and disbelief. How is he still alive? He muttered under his breath, gripping his weapon tightly. Krail stepped forward and spoke in the Voralis tongue, his deep voice echoing through the forest. Though Lucas did not understand the words, Nira did. Her expression darkened, and she shouted something back at him. Her voice was fierce, filled with defiance. Krail laughed, a cold, mocking sound. He pointed at Lucas and then at Nira, making a clear gesture. One would die, and the other would be dragged back in chains. Lucas glanced at Nira. What did he say? He asked, though he knew she could not understand him. Nira did not need to translate. She gave him a sharp look, her meaning clear without words. This was the final battle. If they did not defeat Krail here, they would never escape. The hunters advanced, weapons raised. Lucas fired his energy weapon, hitting one of them squarely in the chest. The creature dropped instantly. The others charged forward with a savage cry. Nero leaped into the fight, her twin blades flashing like silver lightning. She moved with speed and precision, cutting down two hunters before they could even raise their weapons. Lucas stayed close to her, covering her back with quick, well-aimed shots. Despite their skill, the enemy was relentless. A hunter lunged at Lucas from the side. He barely had time to roll out of the way, firing as he moved. The shot hit the attacker in the leg, sending him sprawling. Krail hung back at first, watching the battle unfold with cold calculation. Then, when only two of his hunters remained, he charged forward with a roar. His massive axe swung through the air with terrifying force, striking the ground where Lucas had been standing a second earlier. Lucas scrambled backward, his heart pounding. The sheer strength behind Krail's swings was overwhelming. A direct hit would kill him instantly. Nira rushed to engage Krail, her blades meeting his axe with a loud clash of metal. Sparks flew as they fought, each strike shaking the ground beneath them. Lucas could only watch in awe and fear as the two warriors battled. Nira's movements were fluid and precise, but Krail's raw power was nearly unstoppable. Each time she struck, he blocked. Each time she dodged, he countered. Lucas knew he had to help, but his weapon was nearly out of charge. He fired at one of the remaining hunters, taking him down, then turned his focus to Krail. He aimed carefully and fired at a weak point in Krail's armor near the shoulder. The shot hit, making Krail roar in pain. It was not enough to stop him, but it gave Nira a brief opening. She seized the moment, spinning low and striking at Krail's legs. Her blade cut through the joint in his armor, causing him to stumble. For a brief second, victory seemed within reach. But Krail recovered with frightening speed. He swung his axe in a wide arc, catching Nira across the side. She was thrown through the air and crashed into a tree with a sickening thud. No! Lucas shouted, his voice breaking. He ran to her side as Krail advanced, his massive form blocking out the sunlight. Nira lay on the ground, gasping for breath. Blood stained her lips, and her blades lay just out of reach. Lucas knelt beside her, panic rising in his chest. Krail loomed over them, his eyes cold and merciless. He raised his axe for the final strike. Lucas acted on pure instinct. He grabbed one of Nira's fallen blades and swung wildly at Krail's knee. The strike was clumsy but powerful enough to make Krail falter. With a roar of rage, Krail kicked Lucas aside. The human rolled across the ground, his ribs aching, but he refused to stay down. Staggering to his feet, Lucas stood between Nira and Krail. His body shook with exhaustion and fear, but his resolve was unbreakable. "You'll have to go through me," he said, even though he knew Krail could not understand. Krail sneered and advanced. His massive form towered over Lucas like a mountain. Lucas dodged desperately, avoiding strike after strike. He was fast, but he knew he could not keep this up forever. Behind him, Nira stirred. Through the haze of pain, she saw Lucas standing alone against their enemy. A surge of determination filled her heart. She could not let him fight alone. With a cry of defiance, Nira pushed herself to her feet. Her body screamed in protest, but she ignored the pain. She grabbed her second blade and charged at Krail with all the strength she had left. Lucas saw her coming and stepped aside just as Nira leaped into the air. She brought both blades down in a single, powerful strike aimed at the gap in Krail's armor. The blades sank deep. Krail roared in agony, dropping his axe as he staggered backward. Nira landed gracefully, her chest heaving. With one final motion, she twisted her blades and pulled them free. Krail stumbled, his body shaking, and then collapsed to the ground with a thunderous crash. His lifeless form lay still, finally defeated. The forest fell silent. The last remaining hunter fled into the mist, unwilling to share Krail's fate. Lucas ran to Nira's side, catching her as she collapsed from exhaustion. He held her tightly, his arms steady around her trembling form. "You did it," he whispered, even though she could not understand. "You won." Nira looked up at him through half-lidded eyes. She was too weak to speak, but her gaze was filled with gratitude and something deeper, something Lucas could feel in his heart even without words. Then her body went limp in his arms. Panic surged through Lucas, but when he checked her breathing, he found it was still steady, though faint. She was alive, but barely. He carried her to a small hollow beneath the roots of a massive tree, laying her gently on a bed of moss. As he worked to clean her wounds and stop the bleeding, tears burned in his eyes. Lucas leaned close and whispered, "Stay with me, Nira. Please." Without thinking, he pressed his lips to hers. It was a desperate, instinctive act, a promise that he would not let her go. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, beneath his hands, he felt her stir. Nira's eyes fluttered open. She looked at him in confusion at first, then recognition dawned. The kiss had awakened something deep within her, a surge of strength and emotion unlike anything she had ever known. Slowly, she raised her hand and touched his cheek. It was a simple gesture, yet it spoke louder than words. Lucas smiled through his tears, relief flooding his chest. Together, they sat in the quiet of the forest, two souls from different worlds bound by a shared victory. But even as they rested, Lucas knew their journey was not over. The arena masters would not accept this defeat. The final battle for truth and freedom was still to come. The forest of Voralis was quiet as dawn broke across the land. A soft breeze moved through the trees, carrying with it the smell of damp earth and fresh rain. Lucas sat near the hollow where he had sheltered Nira, carefully sharpening one of her blades. His hands were steady, but his mind was restless. Nira lay nearby, her body wrapped in clean bandages. Her breathing had become stronger through the night, and the pale color had returned to her cheeks. Lucas felt relieved, but he knew they were not safe yet. Krail was dead, but his defeat would not go unanswered. The arena masters would soon send more hunters, and they would come in greater numbers than before. Lucas glanced at Nira and saw her eyes slowly open. She blinked at the light, then turned her head to look at him. Even in her weakened state, her gaze was sharp and full of strength. She tried to sit up, but Lucas rushed to her side and gently helped her. "Easy," he said softly, though he knew she did not understand his words. His tone and expression carried the meaning well enough. Nero looked around, confusion flickering in her eyes. When she spotted her twin blades resting beside Lucas, her shoulders relaxed slightly. She pointed to them and then to herself. Lucas nodded and handed them to her. The moment her hands closed around the familiar weapons, a spark of determination lit within her. She was a warrior, and even near death, she would fight for her freedom. For a brief moment, they sat in silence, each lost in thought. Lucas thought about Earth, his home. He remembered the cities filled with light and noise, the blue ocean stretching to the horizon, and the sky dotted with stars. It felt like a dream now, distant and fragile. He wondered if he would ever see it again. Nira, on the other hand, was thinking of her people. She had been taken from them and forced to fight for the entertainment of the arena masters. She had watched friends and family fall in battle, their sacrifices ignored. The pain of those memories burned in her chest, but sitting beside Lucas eased it slightly. Though they were from different worlds, they shared a bond forged through survival and trust. Suddenly, the forest trembled with a distant roar. Birds scattered into the sky, and the ground vibrated beneath their feet. Lucas and Nira exchanged a look. The enemy was coming. Lucas quickly packed what little supplies they had while Nira strapped her blades to her back. Despite her injuries, she moved with purpose. She would not let her weakness slow them down. They set off through the forest, moving quickly but cautiously. Lucas led the way, using his knowledge of terrain to find paths that would keep them hidden. Nira followed closely, her eyes scanning the shadows for danger. As they moved, Lucas noticed a strange glow in the distance. At first, he thought it was sunlight reflecting off water, but as they drew closer, he realized it was something far more dangerous. The arena masters had sent their war machines. Massive mechanical beasts moved through the forest, their metal bodies shining in the dim light. They were accompanied by squads of armed hunters, all searching for the two fugitives. Lucas and Nira crouched low behind a fallen tree, watching as the enemy patrol passed. Lucas's heart pounded. They were outnumbered and outgunned. If they were caught, there would be no escape this time. Nira glanced at him, then pointed toward the far side of the clearing where the machines had come from. She made a series of quick hand gestures. Lucas could not understand her exact words, but he understood her meaning. The machines were controlled from a central command post. If they destroyed it, the hunters would be thrown into confusion, giving them a chance to escape. Lucas nodded in agreement. It was risky, but it was their only hope. They waited until the patrol moved on, then slipped through the trees like shadows. Every step was careful, every breath silent. Lucas admired the way Nira moved, her body perfectly balanced and precise. She had been trained for this kind of mission her whole life. As they approached the edge of the enemy camp, Lucas could see the command post clearly. It was a towering structure made of dark metal, covered in glowing symbols. Strange energy pulsed along its surface, powering the machines and weapons of the hunters. Two guards stood at the entrance, their armor thick and their weapons ready. Nira motioned for Lucas to stay hidden. She moved forward silently, disappearing into the underbrush. Lucas held his breath as he watched her approach the guards. With a blur of motion, Nira struck. Her blades flashed, and the guards fell before they even realized what was happening. She motioned for Lucas to join her, and together they slipped inside the command post. Inside, the air was hot and filled with the hum of machinery. Strange alien devices line the walls, their purpose unknown to Lucas. In the center of the room was a large control panel glowing with shifting symbols. Nira examined it closely, her brow furrowed. She began pressing specific symbols in a sequence Lucas could not follow. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the camp. The machines outside roared to life, but instead of moving forward, they began to spin out of control, attacking anything nearby. Chaos erupted as hunters shouted and scrambled to regain order. Lucas grinned. Nira's plan was working. But their victory was short-lived. A deep, booming voice echoed through the command post. Lucas turned to see a massive figure entering the room. It was Vorok, the arena master himself. His armor gleamed like polished stone, and his eyes glowed with cold fury. "You dare defy me," Vorok snarled, though Lucas could not understand his words. His meaning was clear enough. Nira stepped forward, blades ready. This was the moment she had been preparing for since the day she was captured. Vorok drew a massive weapon, a curved blade that seemed almost too heavy to wield, yet he swung it effortlessly. The fight began with a clash of steel and sparks. Nira moved with incredible speed, striking and dodging with precision, but Vorok was stronger and more experienced. Each blow he delivered shook the room. Lucas searched desperately for a way to help. His energy weapon was nearly depleted, and he knew he could not face Vorok directly. Then he noticed a cluster of glowing cables running along the wall. If he could cut them, it might disable the command post completely. While Nira kept Vorok distracted, Lucas crawled toward the cables. He pulled a small blade from his belt and began sawing through them. Vorok noticed Lucas and roared in rage. He shoved Nira aside and charged at the human. Lucas barely managed to roll out of the way. Vorok's blade struck the ground where he had been a moment before, leaving a deep scar in the metal floor. Before Vorok could strike again, Nira attacked from behind, her blades cutting deep into his armor. Vorok staggered but did not fall. With a final burst of strength, he swung his weapon in a wide arc, forcing Nira to leap back. At that moment, Lucas severed the last of the cables. The entire command post shuddered as energy crackled wildly through the air. Lights flickered, and machines outside exploded one after another. Vorok roared in fury and lunged at Lucas, but his balance was thrown off by the shaking floor. Nira seized the opening. She leaped forward and drove both her blades into Vorok's chest. With a final, defiant cry, she pushed him backward into the heart of the control panel. There was a blinding flash of light, and then silence. When the light faded, Vorok was gone. The command post lay in ruins, smoke rising from its shattered remains. Outside, the hunters fled in panic, their machines destroyed and their leader dead. The forest was once again quiet. Lucas stumbled to his feet, coughing from the smoke. He looked around and saw Nira kneeling on the ground, exhausted but alive. He rushed to her side and helped her stand. For a moment, they simply held each other, their hearts pounding with relief. They had won. As the sun rose higher, they made their way out of the forest together. The road ahead was uncertain, but they would face it side by side. When they reached a clearing, Nira turned to Lucas. She touched his chest gently, then her own, and finally their joined hands. It was a simple gesture, but Lucas understood. She was telling him that their bond went beyond words, beyond worlds. Lucas smiled and leaned closer, pressing his forehead to hers. For the first time since they had met, Nira smiled back.